Conviction is brought to you by Three Rings Circus Productions. For links to our valued sponsors and all the show notes from this podcast, please visit our website, threeringscircus.com.au. We concluded episode 13 of Conviction as Jessica is facing life after the amputation of her arm and her renewed regime of chemotherapy and radiation therapy. Meanwhile, Craig and Project Gymea are facing a major setback when one of the drums of pseudoephedrine goes missing under their watch.
So this is the first time, if you're related to sport, this is the first time someone got through our defence. We'd been running so well for a couple of years now with the first job of Kalachi and now this one. Everything had gone pretty much to plan. This is something that came in unexpected. We weren't ready for that. We thought we were keeping in front of the game, and this happened. It was a massive blow to us, losing 25 kilos of pseudoephedrine. It's a massive blow, and especially to someone that we didn't know. We thought we had most bases covered and we thought we could cover things there, but there's obviously been meetings behind the scene. As I said before, we were always following these guys, and I'm not going to mention all the people who were involved. There's still some around, and obviously probably some that are still active, and I can't positively identify that they were there doing badness, so I'm not going to mention their names, but there's some really good crooks, some really good characters too. A lot of these guys are old wharfies and had a lot of contacts, and when you listen to them on listening devices, it's quite funny, it's quite humorous, and even though they got that criminal element about them, they're quite funny. I'd been working on Harris too for a long time on this job, and got to know him quite well. I thought he was a character. He had a massive background in sport and fitness. As I said, he was a strength and conditioning coach for the Rabbitohs, and I had a bit of respect for him as well, even though here I was investigating him. I found him to be a funny bloke, and it was weird.
Now, we've just heard an interesting side of Craig's covert surveillance. When you watch someone for a long time, you get to understand all aspects of their life. Craig knew that not all of his targets were inherently evil. He observed many redeeming characteristics: humour, strong family units, mateship, and on many occasions good community spirit. A contradiction to the fact that they'd chosen to make money by illegal means by supplying drugs that would ultimately wreak havoc in their own communities and possibly their own family and friends. Focusing back on the investigation of Flack and Harris, one drum of dangerous precursor drugs had slipped their surveillance, and this was one too many. They had to respond, and quickly.
But, where were these drugs going? As I said, we didn't know. It had gone. And we were all called back into the office. And between the Crimes Commissioner and the senior police and us working on the ground, we had to come up or devise a plan of what we were going to do, some sort of strategy. We couldn't let these drugs go again. It was going to produce a fair bit of methamphet. If we kept letting big 25 kilo drums go, we would be criticised. Yes, we were making advancements on a network of drug distributors around the country, but we did have to call a shot, and that was now. We virtually were going to do something that would change things in the course of the investigation. Decision was made that we actually had to go and get the gear, and we were going to make it look like a break and enter. So it was actually going to look like that perhaps the people they supplied had done surveillance on Harris and found out where the safe house was and break in. And that's how we devised it. We had to go obviously and get another covert warrant, the usual, and we had to organise a crew. This time we were taking everything out of the garage. We had to leave it as though it had been broken into. And you can imagine the logistics, especially doing it at 2 a.m. in the morning when you're trying to take so much gear out. Got to load it into a truck. As I said, there was still 13 big drums left. There was a lot of other powder drugs. There was guns. There was armed robbery kits and other paraphernalia used for making drugs. So it was a fair bit to get out. And again, just the slightest noise, if we woke someone up, it would obviously ruin the job. These things didn't come easy, as I said. If you can imagine yourself doing these things in the early hours, breaking in, I'm sure there's probably are some people that have broken in who are listening maybe to the podcast and understand how hard it is. But that's what we had to do. So again, I took my normal position. I was in the street, and it was the easiest way because we'd been in a couple of times now during these hours. So I took my normal spot, and it seemed to take forever. This time it was easy to get in because the boys just took a bolt cutters and cut the padlocks and the locks on the garage, so it did look authentic. Obviously slowly opened up the door, and we had a few guys there that had to cart the gear up and down the road into a small Pantex truck. Again, you got to make sure you're still wearing gloves and all these things, because we want prints, who's been touching it. It might not just be our guys. We don't know what's on the guns and what's on the bags and who's been touching these drums. We don't know exactly where the drums originated from. Hoping that later on down the track there might be serial numbers and we can take it back to an armed robbery that happened or something like that, because it's definitely not a drug that you can purchase. It's in high demand by the criminal element. So everything was done. We managed to get through. It was another long night. It would have been the sun coming up in the morning before we got back and finished it. And of course when we get back, it's not just a matter of dumping it. We've got to then secure all this. We've got to label it all as evidence, and it's got to be locked away in a police area that's safe and secure. It's also hard to take it to a police station because of the corruption aspect, so we had to take that on board as well, because word soon gets around that this happened, and if that happens, it goes back to the crooks, and then the crooks know what's going on. This job was still active, so it wasn't as though we were just going out to arrest them the next day. We wanted to see what the fallout was going to be. Wanted to see maybe who else was involved, who had financial interests in all this as well, who perhaps was involved in the original armed robbery where these drums were taken. Because obviously they were worth so much, and you're virtually looking at a super fund for a couple of these guys, because it would have lasted them a number of years in dollars.
With the drugs out of circulation, with the apparent theft by a rival criminal, Project Gymea knew there was going to be some swift action. They had to be hyper-vigilant and ready to respond.
So we were ready for the aftermath, and it wasn't long before the guy who actually rented out the unit to Harris, one of their associates, came down, and all you could hear when he walked down was, "Fuck, fuck, fuck, God." He's had a look, and you'd imagine what his side is. He's lifted up and seen the place empty and seen that the padlocks have been broken into. He's gone straight onto his phone and rung Harris and said, "Mate, you better get yourself down here. It's gone. Everything's gone." Harris going, "What's the matter?" "Mate, I just walked down and found the garage. It's been broken into. Completely empty." There was like a pause of disbelief. Harris just said, "I'm coming." Sure enough, we see the tracker, and the tracker's moving. There was a loose follow from his place over to Drummoyne to meet old mate. And Harris has had a quick look in there. He didn't stay long. He had a quick look for himself, had a quick conversation outside. Couldn't get it all. The listening device was in the garage, so he didn't get the whole thing because he had a quick look and then just disappeared. Got in his car, and of course he's on to Flack. He said, "Mate, I've got to see you. Everything's gone." Flack's there going, "What are you talking about? What do you mean everything's gone?" Same thing, is disbelief. And he's just mentioned, in code, virtually what's happened. He said, "Come and meet me," and told him where he was. They've had this meeting, and the whole lot, the drugs, the chemicals, the amphets, the guns, the hold-up kit, everything's gone. So you can imagine the look on Flack's face. Everything that he'd been storing there, which was going to last for years and years and years of a good life. These guys had a good life. We used to follow him to restaurants, high-class restaurants. He drove a nice Mercedes. They didn't really work, apart from Harris doing his couple of hours a day with the S&C, strength and conditioning. But Flacky certainly had a good life. He's obviously made a few calls, and we then had to follow them to the inner west, and they went to a park, and it was a massive park, and these guys, their heads were like on swivel sticks. They were looking around, and even though, you know, they're probably believing that the place was broken into by the guys who they supplied the drugs to, I'm sure in the back of their mind they also had a thought of something else happening, but I don't think at any stage they thought of the police. But it wasn't often that, you know, this would happen, and of course they've rung together and got another couple involved, which we believe were the other ones that we were looking for. And one we believe that was there was Michael Hurley, who we mentioned before. Flack had met him before, and we believe that he had some sort of interest in this as well. We couldn't identify them all. There was a few there, and they had a bit of a powwow about what had happened. And then they left, and that was it. Everything went quiet. So it was interesting to see what was going to happen after this. You know, what action would they take? Would they suspect that it was the other guys, or did they suspect something else? It was just a matter of time for us to find out what was going to happen there.
The calm before the storm. For Project Gymea, it was a case of wait and watch. Meanwhile, Jessica was adjusting to her new life as an amputee, and she was exhibiting her amazing resilience. Facing her own significant challenges, Jessica decided to throw a challenge to her own father, as if he didn't have enough already. Craig explains.
Back at home, you know, this is all still happening while we're dealing with hospital life. Again, I'm still sharing things with Lisa's family and Lisa going in and out of hospital. Jessica had become fiercely independent. I know Tim wanted to spoil her rotten and try and help her all the time, but she didn't need it. Every so often she'd come up against an obstacle with her one arm that she couldn't do, and she'd resist it for a while, but then she'd have to ask you to help her, but she hated that. I remember being the end of summer, and we had this pool that we'd redone in the backyard, and it was great to see her having a laugh and a giggle. She'd sort of become good friends with one of the social workers, or not the social worker, it was a volunteer for one of the organisations, Larissa. And Larissa had become a good friend of the family. She worked for, I think, Starlight or one of those, Make-A-Wish Foundation. And she'd become a good friend of the family, and she often come out. And I've got a beautiful video of Jessica playing in the pool with one arm and showing Larissa how proud she was that she could swim and everything else. All these things come back to you, and they're great moments, and you feel very proud of your kids, how they can take something on board that is so serious and stressful for them, but at the other side of it, they just get on with their life, and that's what she did. And it was fantastic to see. We always had a Sunday afternoon family dinner, and especially, you know, obviously we couldn't if we were in hospital, but we also always went round to Lisa's family place for a Sunday night dinner, and I think I can remember telling you when I was doing the paddle that I'd always go for an afternoon paddle, and that's when, you know, hit the sea urchins and a few other things. But I'd do a paddle, and I still paddle now, even though I wasn't training for anything. It was my time where I could get in the water and zone out, and it was my peaceful place. And Lisa had the same with running. She was a mad runner. She used to go out running all the time, and that was her space where she could zone out, and if she had to think about something, she could think about it on her own, and or if she'd want to think about anything, she'd just put her music on and go. But the Sunday nights were great. It was at Lisa's parents' place. I used to get on really well with Lisa's family, which was great, and brothers and sisters were like my own brothers and sisters. They were fantastic family, and I can remember, you know, lying on the floor, and Jessica said, "Dad, let's do another charity. Let's do another A to B for C." I said, "Oh, that's all right for you, but poor old Dad's got to do it." And she said, "No, come on, it'll be really good. Let's do another one." And I could see the excitement in her face, and I thought, yeah, I'm up for a challenge. May as well do another one. And I said, righto, A to B for C. The last one was Avalon to Broadbeach for cancer. I paddled up the coast. Let's get the Australian Atlas out, and let's pick something with A. So you pick something with A, Jess, and I'll pick something with B. So we get the Atlas out, and again, I'm hoping she's going to pick Albury, which is, 800 kilometres away or something, and one of these, Armidale, which is close. But she picks Albany in Western Australia. And I already had B, what I wanted to do. B was Broken Bay. It was where we were sitting at that time. So Broken Bay is right here in Sydney. Beautiful, also known as Pittwater. Beautiful waterways with a peninsula, surf on one side and the bay on the other side. So I'd already set Broken Bay, and when she said Albany, I thought, you're kidding. That's a long way. That's 5,000 kilometres. And she said, there's a couple of conditions, Dad, though. So if we're doing that, you're not allowed to go back out with the sharks, and the other condition is I'm coming with you with this trip. And I said, oh, okay. All right, we can do that. So I thought I can devise a plan. A to B for C, Albany to Broken Bay for cancer. Number 2. So that was it. I started having a bit of a think about it, spent the time in hospital planning, and decided I'd make it like a triathlon. I would run, cycle and paddle across the country, 34 days, covering 5,000 kilometres, which is probably the same as California to Washington DC. This time, let's try and raise a bit more money. So that was the aim, A to B for C, Albany to Broken Bay for cancer, a pretty long triathlon.
This concludes Series 2 of Conviction, the Craig Guzay story. Join us for Series 3 as Craig starts planning his second and more intense ultramarathon, and the investigation into Flack and Harris reaches its exciting conclusion. Conviction, the Craig Guzay story, is a podcast based on Craig's personal recollections. It is not a full and complete representation of the cases, the people, or the investigations, and therefore should not be taken as such. This podcast is based on Craig's memories. Craig and Three Ring Circus have taken care not to disclose surveillance methods that would compromise police procedures. Only real names have been used where we have permission or the records are public domain.